The cedar box was lighter than it should have been. It had survived the house better than either of us. Scuffed edges, a brass clasp softened by time. Afternoon light crossed the floor in quiet bars, dust floating like small memories that refused to rest. When she found it, her fingers hovered over the lid as if asking permission from the silence itself. Then she opened it. Inside were letters bound with twine and a ribbon that had once been pale blue. The scent rose first. Paper, cedar, and the faint trace of the cologne I used to wear when hope still felt safe. Her name appeared on the top envelope, written in my careful hand. Seeing it again was like hearing my own voice return from a distance I thought eternal. She looked at the handwriting for a long time before daring to touch it. I had told myself that silence was noble, that love could be protected by keeping it unsaid. I believed distance was a form of decency, that restraint was the only language a gentleman could trust. But now the words I never sent were speaking louder than I ever did. She broke the twine, slid the first letter free. The paper sighed as it opened. Her lips formed my name, but she didn't say it. That was how she always spoke to me, half silence, half forgiveness. If you've ever loved someone you couldn't have, you know the ache that waits behind every breath. Eleanor. I wrote her name at the start of every letter. It was my private vow, my only rebellion against the life I had promised to others. Imagine loving someone you were never meant to hold. He was a man of honor and silence. She was the reason he questioned both. Between dinners, restrained glances, and broken vows, he learned that true love doesn't always come at the right time. But sometimes it comes only once. Stay until the end. This story will change how you see love. And if you still believe in second chances, like this one written between the lines, like and subscribe for more stories that remind you love can wait and still arrive. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. The letter told her about the night at the conservatory, when rain traced lines on the glass and she played a melody I could never forget. I wrote how the music filled the hall and left me helpless. I stood too far away because near her, my resolve trembled. I described the golden reflection on her wrist, the quiet devotion in her posture, the unbearable gentleness of realizing I was already hers in every forbidden way. I left before the song ended, afraid the truth might slip from my silence. "You never sent these," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just hollow, like a room missing its echo. "No," I answered. "I thought sparing you was the kindest thing I could do." She looked at me with a kind of calm that cuts deeper than tears. "You don't get to decide what I can bear." Her words landed with the weight of a confession disguised as mercy. My father had taught me that men should master their feelings, not serve them. I grew up believing that control was character. When I inherited his name, I learned the same lesson again. Honor demands sacrifice, even of happiness. But standing there in the house we once filled with possibility, her quiet defiance made every rule I lived by feel suddenly small. She opened the second letter. I had written it one winter morning when she fell asleep in the library, a blanket over her shoulders, a pencil resting against her lip. The fire had gone out, but her warmth had filled the room. I wrote that I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, careful not to wake her. That moment had felt holy, as if tenderness itself had asked me to keep it secret. I ended the letter with a promise. "One day, I'll tell you everything." She laughed softly, that breath of sound that once made winters gentler. "You always made the cold feel softer," she said. Her smile disappeared as quickly as it came. Silence stretched between us, comfortable, dangerous, true. "I used to think," I said, That if I could just do the right thing, love would forgive me for not choosing it. And did it? She asked. I'm not sure love knows how to forgive absence. She pressed her fingers to the paper as if the ink still held warmth. You were never absent, she said. You were everywhere I couldn't look. Her honesty stung like grace. The third letter was tied with its own ribbon, narrow, delicate, deliberate. She untied it slowly, eyes cautious. I had written it on a night when the house was too large and my courage too small. I told her about the old clock striking 2, about how it paused before each chime like a heart before confession. I wrote, love isn't a storm, it's a weather meant to be lived with. And then, if you find this someday, it means I failed to be brave in time. Forgive me for thinking distance could keep you safe. Forgive me if it only kept you lonely. When she reached that line, her eyes closed. The afternoon light leaned in through the windows. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. How many are there? She whispered. Enough to build a bridge, I said, if you still want to cross. She tilted her head, almost smiling. After everything, you still speak in riddles. I only know how to speak to you that way. Her hand brushed the bottom of the box and felt something uneven. A hidden panel slid loose, revealing one last envelope, heavier, sealed in wax, dated today. She froze, studying it as if time had folded in her palm. This one's for now, she said. I nodded. The air between us thickened with what neither of us had dared to hope. She touched the seal, but didn't break it yet. Do you want me to read it? She asked softly. Or do you want to? For a heartbeat, I imagined both of us alive again in the same moment. Me, no longer afraid of love's cost. Her, ready to forgive what she never received. The letters had bridged years, silence and pride. What came next would decide if love was still waiting on the other side. She didn't open the last letter. Not yet. She held it between her fingers as if it were alive, warm from something more than touch. The wax seal pressed against her thumb, softening with the heat of indecision. I could almost hear what she was thinking, that there are moments so delicate that opening them too quickly might break whatever still breathes inside. We sat in the quiet that comes after too many words have finally been spoken. The room felt full again, of the past, of unfinished music, of all the versions of ourselves that had walked these floors pretending to be fine. Did you ever think of sending even one? She asked at last. I thought of it every night, I said. Then I'd remember your smile when you spoke of freedom. I was afraid my truth would take that from you. She nodded slowly, the motion small, almost reverent. You gave me silence instead. I thought silence was mercy. It was loneliness, she said, beautifully wrapped, but still loneliness. There it was, the truth neither of us had wanted to unwrap. Her words weren't cruel, they were tender and fatal, like a blade made of glass. I had built my whole idea of love on the belief that protecting her meant withholding myself. I realized too late that love, starved of presence, eventually forgets how to breathe. Her eyes fell on the letters again. She brushed her fingertips across the top envelope, tracing the loops of my handwriting as if memorizing them. You wrote as if you were already gone. Maybe I was, I said. Maybe leaving was the only honest thing I ever did. She looked up. Honest or easy? I wanted to answer, but honesty had a cruel sense of timing. My chest tightened around the memories, her laughter in gardens, our near touches at piano recitals, the smell of her perfume when she leaned past me to reach a book from the shelf. So many moments where truth had wanted to speak and I had silenced it. I thought I was saving you, I said finally, but all I saved was my fear. She didn't respond. Instead, she stood and crossed the room. Her dress brushed the edge of the table, whispering across the quiet. She stopped near the window where the late light had turned gold and soft. I watched her silhouette against it, a shape I knew by heart and never had the right to claim. "Do you remember the lake?" she asked without turning. "Yes. The morning after your father's funeral, you stood there for an hour, just watching the fog lift. I was trying to remember how to be someone again. I almost went to you," she said. "I almost asked if you wanted company, but something in your face told me you were already saying goodbye." I was. "To me?" "To everything," I said. "To what we could have been." She turned then. The light touched her eyes, and they looked like something between sea and sorrow. "I would have waited," she whispered. "That's why I didn't ask you to." She laughed softly, not in amusement, but in disbelief. "You always speak like love is a burden someone has to carry carefully." "It is," I said, "at least the kind that changes you." "And what did it change in you?" "Everything but the ending." Her lips parted as if to speak, but she let the words die there. She walked back toward the box, still holding the sealed letter. "Why now?" she asked. "Why send it after—" She stopped herself. "After you were gone. After everything collapsed. After too late became the only time left." "I didn't send it," I said. "I left it for you to find when it wouldn't ruin your peace." She shook her head gently. "You still think love is something that ruins peace?" "It did mine." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe it wasn't peace. Maybe it was just fear wearing better clothes." Her insight hit me like a mercy I didn't deserve. I wanted to reach for her, but the air between us was too heavy with what-ifs. We had lived entire lives inside unfinished sentences. "Do you want to read it?" I asked. She looked down at the letter in her hands. "Not yet. I want to remember before I learn." She sat on the edge of the chair again, eyes distant, searching the past as if she could still rewrite it. "Do you know what I remember most?" "What?" "The sound of your watch ticking when you were nervous. You'd hide it in your pocket, but I could still hear it. It always reminded me that time was running out for us." "I still have it," I said quietly. "Stopped working years ago." She smiled, but the smile trembled. "Maybe that's how you loved, beautifully, but never moving." Her words settled like evening light. I looked at her and saw every missed chance lined across the years between us. The truth was simple and unbearable. She had been right there all along, and I had chosen the quiet over her voice. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Every day. But regret is a language the dead speak fluently." Her eyes lifted to mine. "You're not dead to me, Ethan." Hearing my name in her mouth again broke something open. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd heard it softened by affection instead of memory. "I don't know how to start again," I said. "You already did," she said. "You wrote the letters." I wanted to believe her, but the ache in me felt too practiced to unlearn. She reached for the ribbon that bound the rest of the letters and began to untie them one by one, stacking each beside her as if restoring the timeline of our silence. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Outside, the light shifted toward dusk, and the first raindrops tapped softly against the window pane. She looked up at the sound, then at me. "You always said you loved the rain." "I did. It hides the sound of regret." "Maybe it also forgives it," she said. Her words hung there, soft, unassuming, powerful. Forgiveness. The one thing I never dared to ask for. She reached for the sealed letter again. Her thumb brushed the wax, tracing the imprint of the crest. "If I open this," she said quietly, "does it end us or begin us? That depends on what you still want to believe. And what if I still believe in you?" For the first time in years, I couldn't look away. The ribbon lay undone. The air smelled of rain and cedar, and in her eyes was the same promise that had once terrified me, that love could survive truth. "Then open it," I whispered. "Let the truth finally breathe." She hesitated, then smiled, a small, trembling smile that belonged to both the girl I loved and the woman who had learned to live without me. Her fingers broke the seal, but before she could unfold the paper, a gust of wind slipped through the open window, catching the flame of the nearby candle and bending it sideways. The room filled with the scent of smoke and rain. She froze, the letter half open, her breath caught between fear and revelation. Outside, thunder rolled softly, the sky graying into twilight. She looked at me one last time before reading, eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. "Whatever this says," she whispered, "don't disappear again." And then, slowly, she began to read. The letter began with hesitation, like someone learning how to speak again. Her eyes followed each word, as if they were footsteps leading into a place neither of us had dared to revisit. I watched her lips move silently, shaping my thoughts from years ago, a conversation between the man I was and the woman who had waited too long to hear him. "Helena, if you are reading this, it means I could no longer keep the truth folded inside me. I have loved you quietly, dangerously, and far too late. I told myself it was enough to protect you, but the truth is that I protected myself from wanting too much, from breaking what I couldn't control. I built my life like armor, and you were the only thing that made me wish I hadn't." Her hands trembled slightly. She paused, glancing up at me with eyes wet but steady. "You wrote this knowing I'd find it someday. I hoped you would," I said, "even if it took forever." She looked down again. "The world expected me to be composed, reliable, the heir who always chose reason over feeling. But you made reason feel small. You reminded me that decency without warmth is just another kind of cowardice." She stopped reading, her breath catching softly. "Cowardice," she repeated. "You always carried it like a virtue." "I thought it was," I said. "Until you." Her eyes lingered on the page. I kept imagining what it would be like to tell you, to see your expression. Surprise first, then understanding, then perhaps something softer. But the cost of honesty felt higher than the cost of longing. I convinced myself that waiting was wisdom. I see now it was fear disguised as restraint. She folded the letter halfway, as if the words were too alive to keep looking at. "You could have said all this when we still had time." "I didn't know how," I said. "I was raised to speak through duty, not desire." She gave a faint smile and a sad, forgiving curve. "You always made love sound like a negotiation with your conscience." "Maybe it was," I admitted. "I didn't trust happiness to last. But you were the only thing I ever wanted to risk for." Her gaze softened, and the distance between us felt smaller, like the air itself wanted to bring us closer. But the years between then and now hung invisibly, reminding us that love delayed is love reshaped. She continued reading. "If life allows me one mercy, it would be this, that you know I loved you in every quiet thing I did not say, that the empty chair beside me, the untouched glass, the late walks through empty streets, all of them were prayers with your name in them. A tear fell onto the page, darkening one of the words. She brushed it away quickly, almost apologetic. "I used to feel it," she whispered. "Even when you said nothing, I could feel you trying to speak." I nodded. "I always thought you heard what I didn't dare say." "I did," she said. "That's why it hurt." The rain outside grew steadier, pattering softly against the glass like applause for a confession long overdue. The scent of smoke from the candle mingled with cedar and rain, and for a moment everything felt suspended. The house, the air, the ache. She turned the page. "If love could be measured by silence, you would have been everything. But silence has no memory. It cannot hold us. So if you find this, know that I finally learned. Love is not something to preserve. It's something to live before it disappears." She let the letter fall onto her lap. The room felt heavier. She leaned back, eyes closed, tears escaping without sound. When she finally spoke, her voice came quiet and deliberate. "You wrote this after you left." "Yes." "Where were you?" "Nowhere that mattered." "Then why didn't you come back?" I hesitated. "Because by the time I could, I thought you'd forgotten me." She opened her eyes and looked straight at me, wounded and kind all at once. "You never gave me the chance to decide that." The simplicity of her words pierced deeper than any anger could. For years I'd blamed time, circumstance, even fate, anything but myself. But she was right. I had chosen absence. "I thought I was protecting you from my ruin," I said. "The business, my father's debts, the scandal." "I didn't need protection," she interrupted. "I needed honesty." Her tone wasn't harsh. It was honest in the way light is, unflinching, illuminating everything it touches. I looked at her and saw the woman she had become, still graceful but quieter now, like someone who had learned to live with unanswered prayers. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know," she replied. "But sorrow doesn't change what it costs." We sat in silence again. The rain eased into mist. Somewhere in the house, the old clock began to tick, slow, deliberate, marking each second that refused to stop for us. She reached for the box, sliding the rest of the letters aside until only the open one remained. Her fingers rested on the edge of the page. "You always wrote beautifully," she said. "You made pain sound like poetry." "It was all I knew how to do," I said. "Turn what I couldn't live into words." She looked at me, eyes searching for something I wasn't sure I still had. "And what do you want now?" "I want to stop writing," I said. "I want to live the words." Her lips parted slightly, the faintest tremor of emotion passing through her face. "You're too late for the life we imagined." "I know," I said, "but maybe not too late for the truth." She studied me for a long time. "What do you expect me to do with it?" "Whatever you need to," I said. "Burn it, keep it, forget it." She shook her head. I couldn't burn what finally felt real. I exhaled, relief and grief mixing in the same breath. "Then let me make it real now." "How?" she asked. "By being here, by not leaving again." She looked down at the letter once more. The ink had begun to blur where her tears had fallen. She traced one line gently with her fingertip. "Love is something to live before it disappears." "Do you think we still can?" she asked. I hesitated. "I think love never dies, but people do. And maybe that's enough reason to try before we do too." Her smile returned, fragile, uncertain, but alive. "You always knew how to make me believe again." I'm trying to learn how to deserve it this time." She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. The ribbon was gone now, there was no need for it anymore. Outside, the rain stopped. The sky cleared into a pale evening light that turned everything silver. She stood by the window again, and for a moment she looked like a memory deciding whether to stay or fade. When she turned back to me, her eyes were calm. "You said in your letter that silence has no memory," she said. "Maybe it's time we give it one." She took a slow step toward me. Not a promise, not forgiveness, just closeness. A beginning measured in inches, not words. And when her hand brushed mine, it felt like the letters had finally found their voice. The next morning arrived softly, wrapped in fog and the faint hum of the city waking. Eleanor stood by the window again, her reflection blending with the pale light. The box rested on the table between us, closed now, the ribbon gone, the silence heavier. The night before had felt almost tender, almost possible. But morning has a cruel honesty. It unwraps illusions too easily. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "It's strange, isn't it? Reading your past while you're standing right here." "I wish I could take it back," I said. "Not the love, the years I buried it." Her gaze stayed on the glass. "You can't take back silence, Ethan. Once it's lived inside someone, it changes what they hear." I wanted to reach for her, but she had built a quiet distance that felt sacred, a space that belonged to truth now, not to us. "I thought last night meant something," I said. "It did," she whispered. "It meant goodbye." The words landed softly, but they split the air open. "Goodbye?" She turned then, and her eyes weren't cold, they were tired. "You gave me your letters, and I finally saw everything I needed to. The love, the fear, the man you were. I can forgive that man, but I can't live with him." Her honesty felt like grace dressed as pain. "You think I haven't changed? I think you have," she said. "But I've changed too. And the versions of us that could have survived together, they're gone." I looked at her, at the quiet strength in her shoulders, at the calm that years of disappointment had taught her to wear like armor. "Then why did you read them?" "To let you go properly," she said. "I didn't want to keep wondering what might have been." The morning light moved higher, washing the room in grey gold. Her shadow crossed mine on the floor, and for a moment they touched, just the shadows, not us. "Do you remember the night at the lake house?" she asked suddenly. I nodded. "Every detail. You told me that the stars made you believe in second chances." "I meant it." "Then why didn't you take ours?" I had no answer. Regret doesn't translate well into language. It lives in pauses, in the way your throat closes around a truth you can't deliver. She looked down at the box. "You kept every letter as if they were proof you felt something real. But love isn't real because you write it, Ethan. It's real when you show up." Her words hit with precision. She wasn't angry. She was right. Every letter I had written was an attempt to feel brave without being brave. "I can show up now," I said, voice trembling more than I wanted it to. She smiled faintly, not cruelly, just sad. "Now isn't the same as then." She moved closer, enough for me to see the small scar near her lip, the one I used to notice only when she smiled. "You know what hurts most," she said. "You made me wait for a love that only existed in paper. I never wanted to make you wait. But you did. And in that waiting, I built a life." Her words hit like a door closing softly but completely. I could see it, the life she had built without me, the quiet resilience, The mornings she learned to wake up not expecting anything. "I didn't marry," she said after a pause, "not because of you, because I wanted to stop choosing people who reminded me of what I'd lost." I felt something twist inside me. "Eleanor." She looked away. "I forgave you a long time ago. I just didn't know it until now." The rain had stopped, leaving the air clear and sharp. The house seemed smaller, as if the memories inside were finally being folded and put away. "What will you do?" I asked. "Live," she said simply. "That's what your letter told me to do, isn't it? To live before it disappears." Her words echoed mine, but they didn't sound like an invitation. They sounded like a promise to herself. She reached for the box and placed her hand over it. "You can keep the rest if you want. They belong to you as much as they do to me." "No," I said quietly. "They belong where they were found. You gave them meaning." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe that's true, but I don't need them anymore." She stepped back, her face illuminated by the faint sun now breaking through the clouds. "You were right about one thing, Ethan. Love doesn't die. But sometimes it stops asking to be remembered." I wanted to stop her, to speak, to say something that would change the ending, but the story had already written itself. Every unsent letter, every hesitation, every almost confession had brought us here. She walked toward the doorway, pausing once to look back. "You once wrote that love is a weather meant to be lived with. You were right. But not every storm is meant to return." Her voice lingered even after she was gone. The house felt too still. The ticking clock, the faint scent of her perfume, everything conspired to remind me of what had just ended. I sat down and stared at the box, at the ribbon lying loose beside it. I wanted to hate those letters, but instead, I felt grateful. They had given me one last conversation with her, the only one we ever truly finished. As the light shifted through the curtains, I opened one of the older envelopes. The paper had yellowed slightly, edges soft from years of waiting. I read my own words again, written by a man who thought he could love quietly and still be whole. "If I never see you again, know that every sunrise will still carry your name in the light." I closed the letter and smiled, not from joy but from understanding. Some stories are meant to be incomplete, not failures, just unfinished symphonies left to play inside those who remember. Outside, the sun finally broke free, casting warmth across the table. It touched the box, the letters, my hands. It felt like forgiveness, faint but real. I whispered her name once more, not as a plea, not as regret, but as gratitude. Then I stood, opened the window, and let the air move through the room. The letters stirred softly, as if breathing for the first time. One slipped free and landed on the floor, the ink faintly glowing in the light. I picked it up and read the closing line I'd forgotten. "Love never leaves. It waits until we're ready to meet it again." I folded it back carefully, smiled, and placed it inside the box. This time, I didn't close the lid. Days passed differently after she left. The air in the house carried her absence like perfume, faint, elegant, impossible to ignore. I would catch myself turning toward sounds that weren't hers, glancing at the doorway when the light shifted, as if memory had its own footsteps. Grief is strange that way. It imitates hope until you learn the difference. I tried to fill the quiet with order. The letters remained on the table, the box open, the ribbon folded neatly beside it. Every morning I would walk past it and promise not to look again, and every evening I would fail. I wasn't reading them anymore. I was listening, and to the person I had been when I wrote them, to the man who believed that love could wait until the world was ready. It was a lie, of course. The world never becomes ready for love. It's people who must. And I hadn't been. Sometimes I would walk to the garden behind the house. The bench under the elm still held the faint imprint of 2 summers ago when we had sat there without speaking, sharing silence like a secret. The grass had grown wild, untamed, but the wind still carried the same rhythm, soft, measured like the breath of something that refuses to end. I began writing again, not letters this time, but reflections, not for her, not for anyone. Just to untangle what years of restraint had done to me. I wrote about the kind of pride that hides inside good intentions, about the elegance of apology, and about the terrifying peace that follows real loss. At night, I would sit by the fireplace reading the same sentence over and over. She forgave me, but not enough to stay. Forgiveness without return. It's a kind of mercy that burns clean. It leaves no bitterness, only clarity. The more I thought about her words, the more I realized that love had not ended. It had evolved. It had turned into something quieter, wiser, stripped of need. Love, when it survives its own story, becomes devotion. I started noticing small things again. The way morning light touched the floorboards, the hum of the kettle, the sound of rain easing against the windows. It felt as if life was gently reminding me that it continues, with or without witnesses. One afternoon, I went through the letters once more, not to reread them, but to see them as artifacts of a man learning to feel. Each one was a different version of me, hesitant, proud, afraid, hopeful. By the end, I saw not tragedy, but growth. Every sentence was a step toward honesty, even if it had taken years to arrive. On the last page of the final letter, I noticed something I hadn't before, a small unfinished line at the bottom. If I ever learn to live what I write, perhaps she will find me again. It wasn't a wish, it was a direction. That night I packed a small bag and left the house for the first time in weeks. The city had changed. New shops, new faces, but the river was the same. It shimmered beneath the bridge where we had once walked side by side, our hands brushing but never daring to meet. I stood there until the streetlights came on, each one reflecting on the water like scattered gold. I realized then that every moment I had loved her was still alive somewhere in the world, not in memory but in texture. The sound of piano keys, the smell of rain, the hush before dawn. A man doesn't escape love like that. He learns to live as part of it. I visited the conservatory the next day, the same one where she had played years ago. The hall was empty, echoing softly. On the piano rested a single rose, not fresh, not dry, something in between. I sat on the back bench and let the stillness speak. In that silence I felt something I hadn't felt since before her. Gratitude. Not for the outcome, but for the depth she had carved into me. Love had not broken me. It had refined me into someone finally capable of truth. When I returned home, I placed the letters back inside the box, but this time I added a new one, the first I had ever written after she was gone. It began simply, Eleanor. If ever you find this again, know that I finally understand what love asked of me. It wanted presence, not perfection. It wanted courage, not protection. And I am learning both. I didn't sign it. Some words don't need ownership to be sincere. That night, I didn't dream of her. For the first time, I dreamed of light, endless, soft, forgiving. In the days that followed, I rebuilt small parts of my life. I reopened the foundation my father had left behind, dedicating part of it to scholarships for young musicians. It felt right. She had once told me that music was love with structure, and now I understood. Creation is what remains when affection outlives its form. Sometimes I would receive letters from students thanking me, not knowing that their words were returning something I had lost: purpose. Weeks later, I received a small envelope in return mail. No name, no address. Inside, a single sheet with 6 words written in her handwriting. I heard the music. I smiled. I read it again and again, until the ink almost blurred. It wasn't a promise, nor an invitation. It was acknowledgement, proof that some connections never dissolve, only change shape. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some goodbyes are too sacred for repetition. In the evenings, I began to walk through the city with lighter steps. The same air that once felt heavy now felt kind. Every stranger's face seemed to hold a trace of something familiar. The quiet courage of people learning how to love despite endings. I realized I no longer waited for her return. I carried her presence differently now, not as longing, but as gratitude. She had been the lesson life used to teach me everything I refused to learn. On the first day of autumn, I returned to the lake. The trees were beginning to turn, their reflections trembling in the water. I sat on the same bench and took out a small notebook, not to write her name but to write mine, as if claiming my own story for the first time. I wrote only one line: "The heart does not move on. It grows deeper roots where it was once broken." Then I closed the notebook and let the wind take the page. It lifted, swirled, and drifted over the lake, not lost, just free. For the first time, I felt the peace she had spoken of, the kind that doesn't erase the past, but redeems it. The kind that lets you breathe without waiting. And as I stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of something across the water, a woman in a pale coat, walking slowly along the opposite path. Too far to be sure, too familiar to dismiss. I smiled, not in recognition, but in understanding. Some stories end not with closure, but with grace. The woman across the lake paused. For a breathless moment, neither of us moved. The water between us held the light like a secret, the wind shifting it into 1,000 small glimmers. I couldn't see her face clearly, but something in her posture, the tilt of her head, the calm in her stillness, felt achingly familiar. I didn't call out. I didn't wave. After all these years, love no longer needed to be loud. It only needed to be true. She stood for a while longer, then continued walking until the trees took her from view. But something stayed, the feeling that what once was broken had found its way into gentleness. I remained there, the faint chill of the wind brushing my hands, and let the silence wrap around me like an old coat. That night, I returned home to the house that no longer felt empty. It was quiet, yes, but not hollow, quiet in the way of peace after confession. The letters still sat in their box, but they no longer called to me. They had done their work. I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, the same spot where she had once stood with morning light touching her shoulders. I thought of all the ways we had tried to protect love instead of living it, how many chances we had mistaken for timing. But there was no bitterness left, only gratitude that we had met at all. Redemption, I realized, is not about changing what happened. It's about meeting your mistakes with mercy. I began to write again, but this time not to her. I wrote to myself, the man who had been afraid to love, the one who believed silence was a virtue. I told him he was forgiven. Days turned into weeks. The world moved on as it always does, but something in me stayed still, as if I'd reached the quiet center of a storm that had lasted half a lifetime. One afternoon, as I walked through the old quarter of the city, I heard a melody drifting from an open doorway. A piano. Soft, deliberate, familiar. I stopped. My breath caught before I even realized why. The notes were from the piece she used to play, the one from the conservatory the night I left before the song ended. I followed the sound inside. The music school had changed names, but the same piano stood on the same stage, sunlight sliding across its surface like liquid gold. And there she was. Older now, her hair gathered loosely, a few strands silvered by time. She didn't see me at first. Her eyes were closed, her hands steady. The melody filled the room, not flawless, but alive, carrying the kind of imperfection that only truth can give. I stayed by the door watching. Each note seemed to erase a distance I'd thought permanent. When the last chord faded, she lifted her gaze. Her eyes found me instantly. No surprise, no startle, just quiet recognition, as if she had been expecting this all along. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled, a small, knowing smile that reached her eyes. "I wondered how long it would take you," she said softly. "I wasn't sure you wanted me to," I replied. She laughed, and it sounded like the first day of spring. I didn't. But then I realized forgiveness isn't complete if it doesn't give you a place to stand. I stepped closer. The air between us was warm with sunlight and something else, understanding. "I didn't come to ask for anything," I said. "Only to thank you." "For what?" "For finishing the song." She tilted her head, a hint of tenderness crossing her face. "You think it was unfinished?" "For me, it was." She looked down at the piano keys, brushing her fingers lightly across them. "Then maybe it's time you played the rest." I smiled faintly. "I don't remember how." "Then start with what you feel." Her words carried the same calm conviction they always had. I sat beside her, hesitant at first, my hands hovering above the keys. She played the first note again, and I followed. The sound was imperfect, awkward, uneven, but she smiled at each mistake, and soon the room filled with something neither of us had expected: laughter. We played in fragments, stopping, starting, finding rhythm in the pauses. It wasn't a duet, not exactly. It was a conversation. Every chord said what letters never could. Every silence meant what words had failed to hold. When the melody finally settled into quiet, she leaned back and looked at me. "You learned," she said. "What?" "To stay." For a long time we sat there, the afternoon slipping into dusk. Outside, the first lamps flickered to life, their reflections trembling across the glass. "I don't know what this means," I said, "if it's a beginning or just a beautiful ending." "Does it matter?" she asked gently. "We're here now, that's enough." I nodded. "It is." She reached for her coat, ready to leave. Before she did, she turned to me once more. "You were right about love being a kind of weather," she said, "but you forgot something." "What's that?" "It changes every time you step into it." She smiled again, and I watched her walk away. Not with sadness this time, but reverence. Some loves aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to return you to yourself. When the door closed, I stayed for a while, the piano still humming faintly in the air. I played one final chord, soft and uncertain, letting it linger. It sounded like forgiveness. Later that night, I placed one last letter in the box. "Eleanor," we met again, and it was enough. Not to start over, but to understand. Love didn't end where we stopped speaking. It waited, patient and unchanged, until we could meet it with open hands. I no longer need to be brave to love. I only need to be grateful. I sealed it without a ribbon, without ceremony. Some truths don't need to be hidden again. As dawn approached, I carried the box to the garden and buried it beneath the elm tree, the same place where we once sat, where silence had first learned our names. I covered it with earth, pressed my hand over it, and whispered a thank you to the years that had led me here. When I rose, the horizon was turning gold. The lake shimmered in the distance, the surface calm, the wind gentle. I took a breath, deep and unguarded. For the first time in my life, I felt light, not because love had returned, but because I had finally stopped running from it. The sun climbed higher, touching everything it could reach. And as I walked away from the house, the garden, the letters, I realized something simple and freeing. The story wasn't about her forgiving me, it was about me learning to forgive myself. Months passed, and the world turned quietly, as if granting me permission to begin again. The house, once filled with echoes, had become a place of calm routine. I still walked through its halls in the morning light, touching the walls like one might greet an old friend. The silence that used to haunt me now felt like company. It had changed shape, the way grief turns into wisdom when you stop arguing with it. The garden outside had grown wild and beautiful. The elm tree stood taller, its branches moving gently over the patch of soil where the box rested. Sometimes I would sit nearby with a book or a cup of tea, and the breeze would feel almost like breath. I never dug it up again. The letters didn't need to be read anymore. They had done what love always tries to do, teach, wound, and cleanse in the same motion. I started playing the piano again. Not well, not consistently, but enough to remind myself that beauty doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence. Every note I played was quieter now, slower, as if the music itself had learned humility. I wasn't trying to perform anymore, I was trying to feel. One morning I received another letter. No return address, just my name written in a familiar, elegant hand. For a moment, my pulse forgot how to move. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet, folded once. Ethan, you were right about love being a weather. It comes and goes, but it leaves the world softer each time. I've found peace in the music again. I hope you found yours in the silence. If we ever meet once more, let it be as two people who finally understand what it means to stay. No signature. None was needed. I smiled, not because I expected anything more, but because it was enough. Closure doesn't always mean ending. It often means acceptance. I folded the letter and placed it on the piano, where sunlight could rest on it through the window. From that day on, I began living as though she could see through the quiet, keeping the foundation alive, mentoring young musicians, spending afternoons at the park by the lake. I spoke to people more, not about her, but about what she had taught me, that love is not possession, it's recognition. Sometimes when the weather turned gray, I would walk to the same bridge where I had last seen her reflection across the water. I never expected her to appear, but I liked knowing that she existed somewhere beneath the same sky. That was enough. Love had matured into reverence. One late afternoon, as autumn deepened, I sat on that bench again. The wind carried the faint scent of rain and distant music. For a moment I thought I heard her laugh, soft, brief, familiar. It could have been memory or mercy or both. Either way, I smiled. I took out my notebook, the same one I had begun months ago, and wrote slowly, "Love doesn't always end with loss. Sometimes it ends with clarity. Sometimes it ends when you finally forgive yourself for being human." I closed the notebook and leaned back, watching the clouds drift lazily across the pale sky. There was no ache left, no regret sharp enough to draw blood. Only warmth, only gratitude. I thought about how I used to believe love was a grand event, a fire, a revelation, a symphony. Now I knew better. Love was in the ordinary, in the way light touched a glass of water, in the laughter of strangers passing by, in the way the world keeps offering small beginnings after every ending. When the first leaves began to fall, I stood. The lake shimmered faintly, the air cool and sweet. I whispered her name, not to call her back, but to bless her wherever she was. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for teaching me how to stay." As I walked away, I realized that the love we'd shared had never been wasted. It had simply completed its work. It had built something invisible but lasting: character, depth, tenderness. That was its legacy. Later that evening, I lit a single candle by the piano and played the melody we had shared. My hands no longer trembled. The notes flowed easily, unhurried, content. When the song ended, I didn't feel loss. I felt completion. The candle flickered softly, its light moving across the letter she had sent. The flame bent once, then steadied. Outside, the wind carried the faintest echo of her piano, perhaps from a window far away, perhaps only from memory. It didn't matter. I closed my eyes and let the sound fill the room. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing or pretending. I was simply alive inside the truth I had spent years avoiding: that love never really leaves. It transforms, and in its transformation it redeems. I opened the window to let the music escape into the night. Somewhere I liked to believe she might hear it and know that I finally understood. As the stars began to appear, quiet, deliberate, patient, I whispered what would become the final line of my story: some loves do not return to be lived again. They return to remind us that we once lived deeply enough to remember. And I smiled, because that was enough. The next morning, light poured through the windows, soft and forgiving. I brewed coffee, fed the small cat that had started visiting the garden, and sat by the piano. Life had found rhythm again, ordinary, imperfect, human. I wrote one last reflection, not for Eleanor, not even for myself, but for whoever might find it someday. If this story reaches you, let it remind you that love's purpose was never permanence. It was transformation. Don't wait to speak what your heart already knows. Don't mistake silence for strength, and when the moment passes, let it go with grace. I placed the note beneath the candle and left it there. As the day warmed, I stepped outside. The garden shimmered with light. Bees moved lazily through lavender, and the elm tree whispered softly above me. I looked toward the horizon and felt something vast but gentle. Peace, yes, but also belonging. I had finally come home to myself. If this story touched your heart, like and subscribe for more tales of love and redemption, because some stories don't end, they become part of who we are. Some treasures are not measured in gold, but in courage and love. Would you have done the same if it were you?